The encrypted phone buzzed at exactly 3 a.m. Park Min-seok didn't even look up from the stack of cash he was counting. He just smiled. Slow, satisfied, the kind of smile a man wears when he believes he's already won. He picked up the phone, listened for 4 seconds, and said 2 words into the receiver. "She's arrested." Then he set the phone down and poured himself a drink. He had chosen Amara Bennett on purpose. Not because she was dangerous, because she wasn't. Because she was the kind of woman people looked through like glass. Overweight, soft-spoken, always apologizing for taking up space. A black secretary with thick framed glasses and coffee stains on her sweater, filing reports in the corner while powerful men talked over her head. Nobody would believe she knew anything. Nobody would believe she mattered. That was exactly why Min-seok used her name. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought your silence meant you were empty, if you've ever been invisible in a room full of people who should have seen you, then you already understand what happens next. Drop a like. Leave your city or country in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. And stay until the end, because the woman they tried to bury is about to change everything. The rain came down on Seoul like it had a grudge. It wasn't the soft kind of rain that makes people philosophical. It was the kind that floods gutters and snaps umbrellas inside out and makes taxi drivers swear. It hammered the windows of Kang Jun-hyuk's private office on the 42nd floor, and he sat behind his desk with a glass of cold barley tea he hadn't touched in an hour, reading a shipping report with the particular kind of focus that looked, from the outside, like boredom, but was actually something closer to controlled fury. The phone rang at 3 in the morning. Jun-hyuk looked at the screen. Unknown number, encrypted routing. He answered on the second ring. "Sir?" The voice on the other end was male, clipped, careful. A police officer trying very hard not to sound nervous and failing. "We have someone in custody. She gave us this number as her emergency contact." Jun-hyuk said nothing. He set down the shipping report. "Her name is Amara Bennett. She says she works for you." The silence stretched long enough that the officer cleared his throat. "Sir, the charges are serious. Illegal weapons transport, movement of stolen currency. There are documents with her fingerprints. We found her vehicle 2 kilometers from the Incheon freight yard with..." "Which precinct?" the officer told him. Jun-hyuk ended the call. He sat for exactly 4 seconds, long enough to make sure what he just heard was real, long enough to let the information arrange itself into something he could work with. Then he stood, put on his jacket, and walked to the door. His head of security, a wide-shouldered man named Baek Cheol, was already in the hallway. He'd been there all night. He looked at Jun-hyuk's face, and whatever he saw there made him straighten. "Get the car," Jun-hyuk said. "We're going to the precinct." Baek Cheol blinked. "The police precinct?" "Yes." "You want me to send someone?" "I said get the car." Baek Cheol had worked for Kang Jun-hyuk for 9 years. In that time, he had watched his boss make decisions that other men would have needed days to reach. He'd watched him negotiate with rivals across a table where 2 different men had been shot in that same chair in the same month. He'd watched him sit through a funeral for a lieutenant he'd personally ordered killed without a single muscle in his face moving. He had never watched him move this fast. The drive to the precinct took 18 minutes in the rain. Jun-hyuk sat in the back seat and said nothing. His phone was in his hand, but he wasn't looking at it. He was staring at the river of water running down the window, and his jaw was set in a way that Baek Cheol recognized from experience as, "Do not speak to me right now." So Baek Cheol didn't speak. He just drove and tried to figure out what kind of night this was turning into. Kang Jun-hyuk did not go to police stations. That was not a rule anyone had written down. It was just understood. The way certain things are understood in certain worlds. His lawyers went. His representatives went. Sometimes, when the situation required a particular kind of message, he would send someone whose presence alone communicated everything that needed to be said. He did not go himself. He had not walked into a police building in 11 years. And yet here he was, pushing through the front entrance of Seoul Central District Precinct 4 at 3:47 in the morning, rain still dripping from the shoulders of a jacket that cost more than most officers made in 3 months, with Baek Cheol 2 steps behind him and the desk sergeant looking up with the expression of a man who had just realized his Tuesday night was about to become very complicated. The sergeant's name was Oh Dae-jung. He was 41 years old, 17 years on the force, and he had seen enough strange things in that precinct to fill a book nobody would believe. But he had never seen anything quite like the man now standing at his desk at 3:47 in the morning, soaking wet, with eyes the color and temperature of winter concrete. "Amara Bennett," the man said. "Where is she?" It wasn't a question. Oh Dae-jung recognized the difference. "Sir, visiting hours? Where is she?" Oh Dae-jung picked up his phone. What happened in the next 20 minutes was not something he would ever explain fully to his colleagues, because he couldn't explain it fully to himself. He could only say that the man behind the desk had a presence that made the air in the room feel different. Not threatening, exactly, or not only that, but the kind of presence that makes you aware, in a cellular way, that the normal rules of a situation no longer apply. Calls were made. A senior duty officer was woken up. Someone found a supervisor. And eventually, Kang Jun-hyuk was escorted through a locked door and down a corridor that smelled of floor cleaner and old coffee toward the holding area. Amara Bennett was sitting on a metal bench in a cell that was the exact color of regret. She had her knees together and her hands folded in her lap, and she was wearing the same dark gray cardigan she'd been wearing when they picked her up, the one with the loose button on the third buttonhole that she kept meaning to fix. Her glasses had a small crack in the left lens from when they'd put her in the car. Her natural hair, which she usually kept pinned back during work hours, had partly escaped whatever was holding it and was curling softly around her face in the damp air. She looked terrified, but she also looked like she was working very hard not to show it, which meant she had her chin up a fraction higher than it would normally be, and her shoulders were slightly too straight, and she was staring at a fixed point on the opposite wall with the determined focus of someone trying to do math in their head to keep from crying. When the door to the cell block opened, she looked up. Her eyes found Jun-hyuk's face across the length of the corridor, and for just a moment, one unguarded moment, the tension in her shoulders collapsed. Not into relief exactly. It was more complicated than that. Like she'd been holding her breath for 2 hours and had only just remembered how breathing worked. Then the guard was unlocking the cell, and Jun-hyuk was standing in front of her, and she stood up too quickly and grabbed the wall for balance because her legs had fallen partially asleep, and she said, "You came." It wasn't a surprise statement. It was something else. Quieter. Like she'd made herself not expect it and now had to recalibrate. "You called me," he said. "I know, She stopped, adjusted her glasses. "I didn't know if you would." Jun-hyuk looked at her for a moment. At the cracked lens, the loose button, the way she was still pressing her palm to the wall to keep her balance, and something moved through his expression that was gone before it fully arrived. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Yes, I'm fine. My legs just—" She took a step to demonstrate and wobbled slightly. He caught her arm. She stiffened, then didn't. "I'm fine," she said again, quieter this time, like she was saying it to herself. "I know," he said, and he didn't let go of her arm. The duty officer tried to stop them at the corridor exit. He had papers. He had procedures. He had a very specific expression that suggested he was aware this was above his authority level, but was going to try anyway, because that was what the papers said. Jun-hyuk's lawyer arrived at exactly that moment, slightly out of breath, holding a leather briefcase and an expression of professional calm that had clearly been assembled in a hurry. His name was Song Ki-tae, and he had been on retainer for 6 years, and he was very good at his job, which was apparent from the fact that he had driven across Seoul in the rain at 4 in the morning without being asked. "The charges are procedurally invalid," Song Ki-tae said to the duty officer before the man could speak. "The evidence chain of custody is broken at intake. I've already reviewed the log. Additionally, the search warrant has a technical error on the authorization timestamp that voids it under Section 48 of the Criminal Procedure Act. My client is leaving." The duty officer opened his mouth. "You're welcome to file a formal complaint," Song Ki-tae added, "but I'd suggest reviewing the warrant first." They were outside in 11 minutes. The rain had softened by then, still present but quiet. Seoul in the early morning had a particular emptiness to it, not lonely, more like held breath. The lights of the city reflected on wet pavement and made everything look like it was underwater. Amara sat in the back of the car with a blanket that Baekchul had produced from somewhere, wrapped around her shoulders, and stared out the window. Junhyuk was beside her, not close. There was appropriate distance between them. But she was aware of him the way she was always aware of him. The particular gravitational quality he had, the sense that the air organized itself slightly differently in his vicinity. She had worked for him for 2 years, 26 months to be exact. She knew how he took his tea, no sugar, very hot, in the white ceramic cup, not the glass ones. She knew which reports he read in full and which ones he skimmed the executive summary of and then filed without opening. She knew that he had a habit of clicking his pen exactly twice before he said something he'd decided he wasn't going to explain. She knew these things because knowing them was her job, and she was very good at her job, even though almost nobody in the organization had ever seemed to notice that, which was fine, which was actually how she had preferred it, until tonight. "You should have called your family," Junhyuk said. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his phone, or appearing to. "My family is in Atlanta," Amara said. "It's 11 a.m. yesterday for them. I didn't want to—" She stopped, tried to figure out how to finish that sentence. "I didn't want them to panic. So you called me instead. You have better lawyers." He looked at her then. She kept her eyes on the window. "Amara." She turned. His face was unreadable in the dark of the car, which was normal. His face was frequently unreadable. But there was something in the way he said her name that wasn't normal, like he was being careful with it. "What happened tonight," he said, "is not random." "I know," she said. "Someone chose you deliberately." "I know that too." A pause. The car moved through a dark intersection. The rain tapped softly on the roof. "How long have you known?" he asked. Amara looked at her hands in her lap. The blanket slipped slightly and she pulled it back up. Her glasses still had the crack. She was going to have to get them fixed. She had a spare pair at her apartment, the older ones with the oval frames that she'd always thought made her look like a librarian from a children's book. And maybe— She stopped herself because her brain was doing the thing it did when she was overwhelmed, which was to start cataloging small logistical details as a way of not thinking about the large, terrifying ones. 11 days, she said. The silence in the car changed texture. Junhyuk said nothing for a moment, then, "Tell me everything." She had found it in a shipping ledger. That was the ordinary, anticlimactic answer to the question of how she had stumbled into the middle of a conspiracy that could have destroyed an empire. Not through bravery, not through investigation, through a number that didn't add up. She had been cross-referencing quarterly reports for 3 of Junhyuk's legitimate holding companies, a task that was, genuinely, as boring as it sounds, which was partly why she had been given it. The assumption was that she would process the paperwork and file it, and nobody would need to think about it. She was good at that kind of invisible work. But Amara had a brain that could not let a wrong number go. It was the way she was built. A discrepancy in a column of figures bothered her the way a splinter bothers a finger. Not unbearable, but present. Nagging. Hard to ignore. The sum in one freight ledger was off by 400,000 won, which was a rounding error in the context of the overall budget, the kind of thing that happened in any organization of sufficient size. She would have let it go, except it happened again. Same freight route, same discrepancy class, different amount. And then again, the following month, different route, same pattern. She had spent 3 days telling herself it was a bookkeeping error. She had a very specific memory of sitting at her desk on a Tuesday afternoon with a cup of lukewarm coffee and trying very sincerely to convince herself that she was overthinking this, that she was the kind of person who found shapes in coincidences because her brain needed something to do. Then she cross-referenced the freight route against the shipping manifest. The cargo listed didn't match the weight, not by a small amount, by a lot. She sat with that for one more day. Then, very quietly, over the following 9 days, she started pulling every document she could access, which was more than most people realized she could access, because she was the one who organized the filing system, and she knew where everything was. And she was the kind of person that people handed things to without thinking about it. Executives talked in front of her. Guards held doors for her without checking what she was carrying. She was, in the most useful possible way, completely beneath notice. She had gathered enough by day 11 to understand exactly what she was looking at, and by day 11 she also understood that she was in danger, because the pattern pointed to someone very close to the center, someone with enough access to move the money without being questioned, someone who had structured it carefully, almost carefully enough. She hadn't told Jun Hyuk yet. She was still trying to figure out how. Then they arrested her, and the decision was made for her. But Jun Hyuk listened. He did not interrupt her. He sat very still in the way he sometimes did when something had his full attention, which was different from his normal stillness, more concentrated, like all his focus had been drawn to a single point. When she finished, he said, "Min Seok." Wasn't a question. Amara looked at him. She hadn't said the name yet. She had described the patterns, the routes, the accounts, the documents with the double ledger system. She had been working up to the name because naming it felt like the point of no return. "How did you know?" she asked. Jun Hyuk was quiet for a moment. Outside, Seoul was starting its slow, early morning process of waking up. The first delivery trucks, the street lights thinning as dawn approached somewhere behind the clouds. "I didn't," he said finally. "Until just now." He looked out the window. Something shifted in his profile, something small and contained and very old. Park Min-seok had been his friend for 23 years. They had grown up 3 streets apart in a neighborhood that ate people who weren't careful. They had survived things together that Jun Hyuk did not think about in any specific way, because thinking about them specifically served no purpose. Min-seok had stood beside him through the years when the organization was being built, and everything was precarious, and the wrong move on the wrong night could have ended everything. He was the one person Jun Hyuk had trusted without conditions. "How confident are you?" Jun Hyuk said. His voice was level, controlled in the way that things are controlled when significant pressure is being applied. "Confident enough that I spent 9 days copying documents before I said anything," Amara said. "Confident enough that I have everything backed up in 3 different places that aren't my work computer or my apartment." He looked at her again. This time the look lasted longer. "You planned for the possibility that you'd be silenced," he said. "I planned for the possibility that I'd be wrong," she said. "I'm a secretary. I organize things. That's what I did." She paused. "I also planned for the possibility that the person I was investigating had enough reach to come after me before I could get the evidence to you directly. Because whoever did this knows your organization. They knew how to move money through it. They knew which routes had the least scrutiny. That means they know people. That means they could—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I wasn't wrong about that part." Jun Hyuk looked at her for another moment. Then he said, "No, you weren't." The car pulled through a gate onto a private road that Amara didn't recognize. Not her neighborhood, not the office district. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe," he said. She looked at the gate closing behind them, at the unfamiliar trees lining an unfamiliar road. She thought about her apartment with her spare glasses and her plants that were going to need watering and the half-finished report she'd left open on her laptop. She thought about 11 days of carrying this alone. "Okay," she said. And the car moved forward into the gray beginning of morning, carrying a woman who had been invisible for so long that she'd almost believed it herself, and the man who, against every instinct of his world, had come to get her in the middle of the night without hesitating. What neither of them said out loud, in the quiet of that car. He had come before she even finished explaining. He had come before he knew what she knew. He had come because she called, and she had never called, and the fact that she had meant something was very wrong. And the fact that she had called him, not her family, not the embassy, not a lawyer, meant something too. Neither of them mentioned it. The rain finally stopped as the city disappeared behind them. The safe house was a low concrete building behind a wall of pine trees that Amara would never have found on her own, on a road that didn't appear on any map she'd ever used. It had furniture that was functional and impersonal, a couch, a table, 4 chairs, a kitchen with a working kettle, and 3 kinds of instant noodles in the cabinet, the kind of space that had been prepared for necessity rather than comfort, by people who understood that comfort was a secondary concern. Baekcheol did a sweep of the interior in 90 seconds, and then stationed himself outside the front door without being told to. Amara stood in the middle of the main room and looked around and tried to locate herself in the situation. This was a technique she'd developed. When the world became too large and too fast, she would focus on something concrete and specific, something she could catalog. The kettle. The three chairs pulled slightly away from the table at different angles. The window with the curtain that didn't quite reach the edge of the frame. "Sit down," Junhyuk said. Not unkindly. "I'm fine standing." "You've been sitting on a metal bench for 2 hours. Your legs were numb in the car. Sit down." She sat. The chair was harder than it looked, which was an achievement. Junhyuk pulled out his phone and made a call that lasted 40 seconds and consisted almost entirely of him saying 3 names and then a location and then hanging up. He poured water from the kettle into 2 cups, set one in front of her, took the other to the chair across the table, and sat. He looked at her steadily. "Tell me again, from the beginning, everything you found." Amara wrapped her hands around the cup. The heat helped. She hadn't realized how cold her hands were. "I already told you in the car." "I know. Tell me again." She understood why. Not because he hadn't been listening, because the first telling is always incomplete. The brain under pressure drops details, fills gaps wrong, skips things it doesn't know it has. The second telling was what he actually needed. So she told him again. This time she went slower. She started with the first ledger discrepancy. The 400,001. The freight route. The Tuesday afternoon with the bad coffee. She described exactly which documents she'd accessed, in what order, over which days. She described how she'd copied them, carefully, methodically, using the office scanner during the lunch hour when the administrative wing was empty because everyone went down to the canteen except her, which was normally an unremarkable fact about her day and was now, in retrospect, something that had allowed her to work completely unobserved. Junhyuk listened without moving. He had his hands flat on the table, not folded, just resting there. Occasionally he asked a question, short, specific, clarifying. Which account number? Which freight company? Which date? When she finished the second time, he was quiet for a moment. "You said the weight discrepancy," he said. "On the second route, what was the listed cargo?" "Industrial machinery components, mechanical parts for a textile factory in Busan." "And the actual weight?" 38% heavier than what industrial machinery components of that type and quantity should weigh. "Who signed the freight authorization?" Amara hesitated. Not because she didn't know, because saying it out loud in this room felt different from saying it in the car, in the dark, where everything was slightly removed from reality. "Min Seok," she said. "All of them. Every freight authorization on the irregular routes going back 8 months. His signature or a digital authorization traced to his access credentials." Junhyuk's hands on the table did not move. His face did not change. But something in the air of the room changed, the way pressure changes before weather arrives. Not visible, but present. 8 months, he said. "Yes." He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the pine trees and the thin early light starting to define the edges of things. Amara watched his back. She had studied him for 2 years across conference tables and office thresholds, and the particular geometry of his relationships with the people around him, and she had learned to read the architecture of his stillness. Right now he was holding something very heavy and deciding where to put it. "He told me 2 weeks ago that he had intelligence suggesting a rival organization was planning to move against us," Junhyuk said. Not to her exactly, more like organizing it aloud. "He recommended we increase scrutiny on incoming shipments from the south." Amara said nothing. She understood the implication immediately. "He was redirecting attention," she said carefully. "He was pointing me in the wrong direction." Junhyuk turned from the window. His face was composed in a way that cost him something. She could see the cost, even if she couldn't name the currency. "While he was pointing me south, he was moving everything through the northern freight lines, which I was not watching." The silence in the room was the kind that has weight. "How close was I to finding it myself?" he said. "I don't know. Weeks? Maybe. The amounts were growing. He was getting less careful. Or more confident." "Yes," she said, That too. Ahmad. Song Kite arrived at 20 past 6 with a messenger bag and 2 additional phones in sealed packaging, and the slightly disheveled look of a man who had been working since 4 in the morning, which he had. He spread documents across the table with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent his career in rooms where the conversation was too important for pleasantries. The arrest is procedurally void, he said. I've confirmed it. The warrant timestamp is incorrect by 14 minutes, which under current statute invalidates the authorization. Additionally, the arresting officer failed to properly log the chain of custody on the seized items, which means even if we couldn't invalidate the warrant, the evidence itself is tainted. Someone made deliberate mistakes, Junhyuk said. Song Kitai looked up. That's what it suggests, yes. The errors are too specific. Someone who understood procedure well enough to know exactly which mistakes would force a release. Amara put her cup down. Wait. Both men looked at her. The warrant was wrong on purpose, she said. The arrest was designed to fail. Apparently, Song Kitai said. That means the point wasn't to hold me. It wasn't to make the charges stick. She was thinking out loud, which she normally didn't do in front of other people, but the thought was moving faster than her caution. The point was to separate me from the office, to give someone time to access files before I could get back and notice they'd been touched. The room was very quiet. Or, she said, slower now, to see whether Junhyuk would come for me, to see whether I mattered enough to move him. Because if I didn't, if he sent a lawyer and stayed where he was, then Min Seok would know I hadn't gotten to him yet. Song Kite looked at Junhyuk. Junhyuk's jaw tightened, a barely visible movement, but she caught it. So my coming tonight, he said, told him exactly what he wanted to know. It might have, Amara said. She wasn't apologizing, she was just accurate. I'm sorry. I didn't think about that when I called. I called. I know, Junhyuk said. I would have come regardless. The way he said it was completely matter-of-fact, no ornamentation, just statement. It landed in the room and stayed there. Song Kite cleared his throat and looked at the documents. There's another issue. The arresting officer, Sergeant Park Hyun-soo, is on record as having processed a building permit application 2 years ago for a property registered under a shell company that traces back to a freight logistics firm in Incheon. Amara's head came up. That's one of the routes. Yes, Song Kite's voice was neutral. It appears Sergeant Park has a relationship with the operation. Whether knowing or incidental, I can't say yet. Knowing, Junhyuk said. You seem certain. Hyun-soo was the officer who called me. He said Amara gave them my number. She didn't. He looked at Amara. Did you? She shook her head. I asked to make my one call. They brought me a phone. I called your encrypted number. I didn't give anyone anything. So Hyun-soo had the number already, Junhyuk said, and he was told to make sure I answered, to confirm I'd come. The shape of it was now entirely clear, and it was not a comfortable shape. Manka. Baek Cheol came in from outside at 7:45. He didn't knock. He opened the door with a particular economy of movement that meant the information he was carrying was time-sensitive. We have a problem, he said. Junhyuk looked at him. Lee Sang-woo just called. He said Min Seok has called an emergency meeting of the inner circle for 9 a.m. He's saying you've been compromised by an outside intelligence operation. He's saying... Baek Cheol stopped, checked himself. He's saying the secretary was working as an informant, that the arrest last night was a government operation, and that your personal security has been fatally breached. The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. It had edges. He's moving now, Amara said, quietly, to no one in particular. He knows I came for her, Junhyuk said. He knows you came for her and he's using it. Baek Cheol's voice was carefully flat. If the inner circle believes she's an informant, anything she's gathered is usable against you. He can claim you've been manipulated, that everything you do in response to what she found is based on compromised intelligence. Amara understood it completely, and the completeness of it felt like something closing around her chest. It was clean. She had to give it to Min Seok. It was genuinely clean. He hadn't tried to destroy the evidence she'd found. He'd tried to destroy her credibility, make her the story, make her the threat, make the fact that Junhyuk trusted her proof of his vulnerability, not her value. Because who would the inner circle believe? The childhood friend, the lieutenant who'd stood beside him for 23 years, the man with a title and a history and a reputation built in blood and loyalty, or the plus-size black secretary with the cracked glasses who organized filing cabinets and made scheduling errors and who nobody had ever looked at directly for longer than it took to hand her a document. She took her glasses off and set them on the table, pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose, put them back on. "How much does Lee Sang-woo trust you?" she asked Baek Cheol. "Enough," Baek Cheol said. "Enough to delay the meeting?" Baek Cheol looked at Junhyuk, a question in the look. "How long do you need?" Junhyuk said to Amara. She thought about the documents, the 3 backup locations, what she had and what it proved, and what someone sitting in that inner circle meeting would need to see to understand the truth in the time it takes for a man like Min Seok to turn a room against a person. 2 hours, she said, and access to a secure printer, and someone who isn't you or Baek Cheol, who can walk into that meeting as a neutral party and present the physical evidence before Min Seok can frame the context. Because if I walk in with it, it looks like I'm defending her, Junhyuk said. Because if you walk in with it, he's already told them you've been manipulated. Everything you say confirms his version of events. Junhyuk was quiet. "She's right," Song Ki-tae said. He had been very still during the last several minutes in the way lawyers are still when they are listening hard. If you lead this, you are already compromised in their eyes before you open your mouth. You need the evidence to arrive without you. "Who?" Junhyuk said. Nobody answered for a moment. "Choi Byung-jae," Baek Cheol said. The name sat on the table. Junhyuk looked at Baek Cheol. Something passed between them that Amara didn't have enough context to read. Some shared memory, some old understanding. "He owes you," Baek Cheol said. "From Daegu." "He also has his own position to protect," Junhyuk said. "If Min Seok has already spoken to him..." "He hasn't. Sang-woo says the calls went out 20 minutes ago. Byung-jae hasn't been reached yet." Junhyuk looked at Amara. It was a specific kind of look, not asking her to decide, but checking something. Checking whether she understood the stakes of the thing he was being asked to do, which was to trust one more person in a situation where trust had already cost him enormously tonight. She met the look. "It's your call," she said. "I can prepare the documents regardless. What you do with them is yours." He nodded. Once. Then to Baek Cheol. "Get Byung-jae. Bring him here first. I talked to him before anything else." Choi Byung-jae arrived at 8:22. He was a compact, dark-eyed man in his early 50s who moved with the particular deliberateness of someone who had learned that fast movements attracted attention. He came in, took in the room in one sweep. Jun Hyuk, Amara, Song Ki-tae, the documents spread across the table, and did not visibly react to any of it. Then he looked at Jun Hyuk. "Min Seok called me while I was in the car," he said, 20 minutes ago. "What did he say?" "That you'd had a security breach, that your personal staff had been turned, that the inner circle needed to hear his account before yours because you were..." He paused. His mouth compressed slightly. He used the word compromised. "And you came here. You sent Baek Cheol. You don't send Baek Cheol for things that can wait." He looked at the table, at the documents, at Amara. "I'm assuming there's a counter-narrative." "There's evidence," Junhyuk said. "Not a narrative. Evidence. You want me to present it? Start it. I want you to look at it first, all of it. And then I want you to decide what you think it shows." Byung-jae looked at him steadily. "And if I decide it's inconclusive, then you leave with what you know and you make your own choices." It was, Amara thought, the right thing to say. Not a threat, not a persuasion. Just, here's the information, here is what I'm asking, here is your exit if you need it. Byung-jae pulled out a chair and sat down. Amara put the first document in front of him. For the next 40 minutes, she walked him through it. Not dramatically, not as an argument. The way she would have walked a new executive through a quarterly report, methodically, in sequence, explaining what each document was and where it came from and what it meant in relation to the next one. Byung-jae asked questions, sharp ones, good ones, the kind that came from someone who actually understood the financial architecture of the organization because he had his own stake in it. She answered every one. When she finished, Byung-jae sat back. He looked at the spread of documents for a moment. He rubbed the side of his face with one hand, a small, tired gesture. 8 months, he said. He's been running this for 8 months. At minimum, Amara said. The earliest document I was able to access goes back 8 months. It may have started earlier. The weapons, Byung-jae said. The Incheon freight route. You know who he was selling to. I have a name on 2 of the manifests. I can't confirm independently who the receiving party is, but the name is, don't say it. Byung-jae's voice was sharp. He looked at Jun-hyuk. If it's who I think it is from the route and the timeline, we have a larger problem than a traitor. Jun-hyuk's expression didn't change. I know. You knew before tonight? I suspected there was movement in that direction. I didn't have confirmation or a source. And now you have both. Byung-jae was quiet for a moment. Then, with the tone of a man saying something he has to say and doesn't enjoy, he was going to burn you down and hand them the territory while you were fighting the fire. The room held that. Will you take the evidence to the meeting? Jun-hyuk said. Byung-jae looked at him, a long look. 23 years of history between Jun-hyuk and Min Seok was a fact in the room. And it meant something, and Byung-jae was weighing it against what he had just spent 40 minutes reading. Yes, he said, but you need to know, some of them may not want to believe it even when they see it, because believing it means everything they thought they knew about how this organization is structured was wrong for 8 months without them noticing. I know, Jun-hyuk said, and some of them will resent that it was found by... He stopped, glanced at Amara. Something careful moved across his face. By someone outside the expected channels. Amara looked back at him. I know, she said. You can say secretary. It's not an insult. Byung-jae held her gaze for a moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect, but the precursor to it. The moment of reassessment. I'll take it, he said, and stood. After he left, the room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet after a decision has been made that cannot be unmade. Amara cleared the remaining document copies into a folder and set it on the table. Her hands were steady. She was mildly surprised by this, and then decided not to examine it too closely because examining it might stop it. You should sleep, Jun-hyuk said. I'm fine. You've been awake since yesterday morning. You spent 2 hours in a holding cell. You've been running documents for an hour and a half. I'm fine, she said again, and then immediately contradicted herself by pressing the heel of her hand against her left eye, which had been developing a low-grade ache for the last 30 minutes. She lowered her hand. I'm mostly fine. Something moved through his expression that might have been the closest he came to a smile under current circumstances. Not warm, exactly, but present. There's a room in the back, he said. Baekcheol will be at the door. You're staying? I have calls to make. She nodded. She picked up her folder. Habit. She was always picking things up and organizing them. And then put it back down because it wasn't hers to take anywhere, and she was running on 3 hours of sleep and an adrenaline hangover, and her instincts were misfiring. Jun-hyuk, she said. He looked at her. She had rehearsed over the last several hours different ways she might say the things she needed to say. In the car, during the document review, while Byung-jae was asking questions. She had framed it various ways, formally, factually, as a professional statement, as a simple question. In the end, she said the only honest version of it. When this is over, she said, I don't think I can go back to just being your secretary. He looked at her for a long moment. His face, as usual, gave away very little, but he was listening. She could feel him listening, the quality of his attention that had weight. No, he said finally, you probably can't. She wasn't sure if that was an answer or an agreement or something else entirely. She filed it in the category of things she would understand later, when she had slept and her brain was functioning at its actual capacity. She went to the back room. She sat on the edge of the bed. She took her glasses off, set them on the small table beside her, and lay back on top of the covers because she didn't have the energy to get under them. She was asleep in 4 minutes. At 9:17, Jun-hyuk's phone rang. It was Byung-jae. The meeting had started. Byung-jae had presented the first set of documents. Min-seok had not left his chair, but 3 of the 7 men in the room had gone very still in the specific way that meant they were recalculating. 2 others had looked at Min-seok. Min-seok had said, very quietly, that the documents were fabricated, that the secretary had manufactured evidence, that Jun-hyuk was not thinking clearly. And then Min-seok had said something that Byung-jae relayed to Jun-hyuk in a flat voice stripped of editorial comment. If you protect her over me, you're telling every man in this organization that a woman you've known for 2 years matters more than a brother you've known for 23. Think about what that means for your authority. Jun-hyuk stood at the window of the safe house with the phone against his ear and the pine trees going green in the morning light and said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "Tell him I'm on my way." He ended the call. He stood there for another moment, looking at the trees. 23 years. He had carried that weight for 23 years. He had watched Min-seok's back and trusted his word and let that trust sit at the center of the organization like load-bearing architecture. And Min-seok had just used it as a weapon, not the betrayal itself. That was almost secondary now, the specifics of money and weapons and rival families. What landed was the calculation behind it. The fact that Min-seok had looked at 23 years of loyalty and decided it was leverage, that he had chosen a moment of crisis to tell Jun-hyuk that protecting one honest person would cost him the respect of his world. He had reached the back room before he was fully aware he was moving. Amara was asleep on top of the covers, still in her clothes, her glasses on the side table, her face, unguarded in sleep in the way faces never are when they're awake, carrying the exhaustion of someone who had been very brave for a very long time, mostly alone. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then he said her name, quietly. She woke the way she did everything, carefully, without theatrics. Her eyes opened, she located him in the doorway, and she was already reading his face before she was fully conscious. "It's him," she said. Not a question. He told them the evidence is fabricated. He told them. Jun-hyuk stopped. Something crossed his face, rare and real. He told them that protecting you is a sign of weakness. Amara sat up. She reached for her glasses, put them on, looked at him. "Is that what you think?" she said. "No." "Then it doesn't matter what he told them." She stood, pulled her cardigan straight. "Take me to the meeting." Jun-hyuk looked at her. "It will be hostile. They already believe." "I know what they believe." She met his eyes, and what was in hers was not bravery exactly. It was something more durable than that, more tired and more certain. "I've been in that room with those men for 2 years. They walked past me like I was furniture. They handed me documents they didn't want anyone to read." Her voice was steady. "Let them look at me now and tell me to my face that what I found isn't real." Something settled in him. A decision that had been forming for hours, maybe longer. Since the phone rang at 3 in the morning, since the car, since the words she'd said when she told him about the ledger discrepancy on a Tuesday afternoon with a cup of bad coffee. He said, "Stay close to me when we walk in." "Always have," she said. And neither of them acknowledged what that meant, because the morning was already moving, and the moment they walked through that door, nothing would be the same as it had been. The building where the inner circle met was a private floor above a legitimate financial consulting firm in Yeouido, which was the kind of arrangement that made sense if you understood that the best place to hide the infrastructure of one world was inside the visible infrastructure of another. Jun-hyuk walked in first. Amara was 2 steps behind him and 1 step to his left, which put her in the position she had occupied for 2 years in every room they entered together. Close enough to be available, far enough to be invisible. Except this morning, she was not trying to be invisible, and the difference was something she felt in her sternum, a pressure that was not quite fear and not quite resolve, but somewhere in the narrow corridor between them. The room had 8 men in it, 7 of them she recognized. She had brought coffee to 4 of them at various points. She had organized documents for 2 others. The 8th, a wide man with a shaved head and a scar along his left jaw that she had always quietly catalogued as probably a knife. She didn't know, and his presence felt wrong in the way that a detail out of place in a familiar document feels wrong. Min-seok was standing at the far end of the long table. He looked, as he always looked, like a man who was comfortable in his own weight. He was 51, built like someone who had done physical work earlier in his life and retained the structure of it even as the work changed. He had a face that defaulted to calm, the kind of trained calm that isn't peace, but is very good at resembling it. He looked at Jun-hyuk when they entered. Then he looked at Amara. And something happened in his expression that she filed immediately and completely. A flicker, very fast, very controlled, that was not surprise. He had expected them. He had expected her specifically. That meant the call from Byung-jae had been anticipated, which meant there was a variable she hadn't accounted for. She didn't let herself react. She kept her face neutral, which was something she was better at than most people knew, because 2 years of being invisible in dangerous rooms had required her to learn how to make her face a surface and not a window. "You brought her," Min-seok said. His voice was even, almost gentle. "I wasn't sure you would." "Sit down," Jun-hyuk said. To the room, not to Min-seok. Several men sat. Some didn't. Byung-jae, at the side of the table, had the expression of a man watching a structure he's been asked to vouch for get its first real stress test. Min-seok didn't sit. "I told them already. Whatever documents she's prepared—" "You'll wait," Jun-hyuk said. The temperature of the room dropped a degree. Min-seok closed his mouth. Not because he was afraid. Amara could see clearly that he was not afraid. But because he was tactical, and a tactical man picks his moments. Jun-hyuk looked at Amara. She opened the folder she was carrying and laid the first document on the table. She had done this 40 minutes ago with Byung-jae in the safe house, and she had done it in her head approximately 14 times since then, and she was going to do it now without apology and without preamble in a room full of men who had never once looked at her like she was worth looking at. "The Incheon Northern Freight Route," she said. Her voice was level. August through the present. 8 months of manifests, authorization signatures, and financial ledgers showing a systematic diversion of funds and materials through shell logistics companies registered in 3 names, all of which trace back to a single originating entity. She put the second document down, and the third. She moved around the table slowly, placing copies in front of each man who was seated, the way she had placed agendas and reports for 2 years, except that this time she was not invisible, and she could feel every pair of eyes in the room tracking her with the disoriented quality of people trying to reconcile what they're seeing with what they expected to see. The weight discrepancies in the manifests indicate the shipments contained materials inconsistent with the listed cargo. Cross-referencing the shipping weights, the route timing, and the financial transfers confirms the nature of the operation. She reached the end of the table. The authorization signature on every irregular shipment belongs to one person. She put the final document down in the center of the table. Min-seok looked at it. He looked at it for 1 second, and in that second, something moved behind his eyes, fast, complex, the calculation of a man updating his position in real time. And then his expression settled back into its trained calm, and he said, "She made these." The room shifted. "Fabricated," he said, with exactly the right weight of tired conviction, as though he'd hoped he wouldn't have to say it, but had always known he would. "I told you before she came in. She has access to the filing systems. She has the digital authorizations. She knows which signatures appear on which documents. All of this," he gestured at the spread of papers, "she could have assembled in 9 days from material she handled legitimately." One of the seated men, Kwon Dae-ho, 58, silver-haired, who had overseen the organization's Eastern Territories for a decade, looked at the document in front of him and then looked at Amara. Not hostile, assessing. "The financial records," Kwon said. "The shell company registrations. Those aren't office documents. How does the secretary access company registration filings?" "She doesn't," Min-seok said. That's my point. Those had to come from somewhere else, from someone who provided them to her, which brings us back to the question of who she's actually working for. Amara said, I can answer that. Everyone looked at her, including Min Seok. She had expected him to try to talk over her. He didn't. He let her speak, which was worse. It was the move of a man who was confident that whatever she said, he already had the counter. The company registrations are in the public commercial registry, she said, publicly accessible. The search takes 40 minutes if you know what names to look for. I found the names by tracing the financial transfers and documents I accessed through my legitimate file management role. The chain is complete and documented, and it does not require a secondary source. A pause. Unless, she said, you'd like to explain why your signature appears on 6 freight authorizations for shipments that don't exist in any legitimate inventory record. Silence. Min Seok looked at her. The calm in his face didn't break. It just changed quality, from something that resembled patience to something that resembled a different thing entirely. Because I signed them, he said, under instructions I received from Jun-hyuk himself. The room did not move. Amara heard her own pulse in her ears, which was new and not welcome. She looked at Jun-hyuk. His face had gone completely still in a way that was different from his normal stillness, deeper and colder and containing something that she had never seen there before, which was the particular expression of a man who has just had a floor removed from under him. That's not possible, Jun-hyuk said. Quiet, controlled, but there was a texture in his voice that wasn't usually there. I have records, Min Seok said. Digital communications. Instructions for the freight operations, routed through a secure channel, authenticated with your credentials. I followed them because I trusted you. Because that's what I do. He looked around the table, not performing, or performing so well that the distinction was functionally irrelevant. I thought it was a side operation. I thought you were managing it directly. I asked no questions because we don't ask questions. Show me, Jun-hyuk said. Min Seok reached into his jacket pocket and placed a phone on the table. Unlocked, pushed it toward the center. Byung-jae leaned forward first. He looked at the screen. His expression didn't change, but he set the phone back down very carefully, which meant something. Kwon Dae-ho picked it up next. Amara watched Kwon's face. He read for 30 seconds. The lines around his mouth deepened slightly. He put the phone down. He looked at Jun-hyuk. And Amara understood, in the specific physical way that understanding sometimes arrives, as something that drops through the chest rather than accumulates in the mind, that the documents on that phone were real. Not fabricated, not assembled from partial truths. Real communications, authenticated, routed correctly, carrying Jun-hyuk's digital credentials and the operational specificity that could only come from someone with genuine executive access. Someone had built this for months. And they had built it so that if the freight operation was ever exposed, the trail didn't end at Min Seok. It ended at Jun-hyuk. The room fractured along lines that had probably existed for years without needing to be visible. 3 men on Kwon's side of the table were quiet in the way that indicated they were waiting to see which way the weight fell before committing. 2 men closer to the door exchanged a look that Amara clocked and filed without reaction. The look of men who had already made a private calculation and were now waiting for an exit. Byung-jae sat very still with his hands flat on the table and said nothing, which might have been loyalty or might have been paralysis. Min Seok stood at the far end of the room and said nothing either. He didn't need to. The phone was on the table, and it was doing the work for him. Jun-hyuk picked it up. He read. Amara watched him read, and she had spent 2 years learning to read him across conference tables and in the margins of his reactions, and what she saw now was a man who was not panicking. Panic was too loud, too reactive, too much a surrender of control. But who was encountering, for maybe the first time in his adult life, a situation he had not been prepared for. He set the phone down, looked at Min Seok. These were sent from my secured line, he said. Yes. I didn't send them. That's what you're saying now. The sentence landed like something thrown, not loud, just heavy and aimed. Jun-hyuk looked around the table, one sweep taking in every face. Whatever he found there made something in his jaw tighten. "I need the room," he said. "Except Min Seok." The men filed out. Byung-jae last, and he met Amara's eyes as he passed, and what was in his look was not comfortable to read. It was the look of a man who had put his credibility behind something and was now watching it become complicated. The door closed. The three of them stood in the room, Jun-hyuk, Min Seok, Amara, and the documents were still on the table, and the phone was still on the table, and the accumulated weight of 23 years was in the room too, invisible and very present. "How long?" Jun-hyuk said. Min Seok tilted his head slightly. "Define the question." "How long have you been planning this?" A pause. Min Seok looked at him with the particular expression of a man deciding how much truth to afford a situation that has already moved past the point where the full truth would cost him anything. 14 months, he said. Jun-hyuk's hands were at his sides. Amar could see the tension in them. Not movement, just contained force, the physical expression of something being held back with significant effort. 14 months, Jun-hyuk said. "You were going to bring in outside partners," Min Seok said. "The restructuring proposal, 2 years ago. You wanted to decentralize the territory management, bring in families from the north, dilute the authority of the inner circle." His voice was even, explanatory, like he was describing a business decision he'd made with reasonable justification. "I built what I built because you were going to give away everything we spent 20 years making. I restructured a proposal," Jun-hyuk said. "I never implemented it, because I made sure the conditions that would have required it never materialized." Min Seok's chin came up slightly. "I managed 3 situations in the last 2 years that you never knew needed managing. I stabilized things you didn't know were unstable. And then I built an exit strategy. Because men like us don't get to retire, Jun-hyuk. We get replaced. I decided to do the replacing on my terms." The silence was thick. "The weapons," Jun-hyuk said. "Who were you selling to?" Min Seok said nothing. "Who?" "People with the resources to absorb the territory when you went down. And I was going to go down. The communications on that phone are forensically authentic. Your credentials, your routing, your operational language. When this operation was discovered, and it would have been discovered, I made sure of that. The investigation would have led directly to you, not to me. I would have been the loyal lieutenant who reported it." A brief pause. "I would have been the one who cooperated." Amara said, "You had a mole in the prosecution office." Both men looked at her. She hadn't spoken since the room emptied, and her voice in the silence sounded different than it had before. Not smaller. Different. "Sergeant Park Hyun-soo connects to the freight company," she said, looking at Min Seok. "But that's the enforcement side. You needed someone to shape the prosecutorial narrative when the case was built. Someone who could make sure the evidence trail read the way you needed it to read." She tilted her head. "Who is it?" Min Seok looked at her with an expression that was, for the first time, something other than trained calm. It was the look of a man recalibrating a variable he'd assessed incorrectly. "She's sharper than I gave her credit for," he said. To Jun-hyuk, not to her, as though she had just demonstrated a trick and he was commenting on the trick to its owner. "Answer her," Jun-hyuk said. Min Seok looked back at Amara. A long moment. "Deputy Prosecutor Yoon Chong-min," he said. "He processes financial crime cases. He's been on the freight company's consultation payroll for 16 months as a legal compliance advisor." Amar said, "So the case was already built. The foundation was laid. All it needed was the trigger event. My arrest." "Your arrest." He studied her. "Which I'll admit was never meant to hold. I needed 24 hours of chaos. Jun-hyuk moving, reacting, exposing how much he trusted you, making decisions outside his normal operating procedure. The arrest was the starting gun." Something moved in his expression, almost admiration, which was the most unsettling thing in the room. "I didn't account for how fast you'd work, or how much you'd already done before I moved." "You underestimated me," Amar said. "I did," he said simply. "It was a significant miscalculation." Why are you telling us all of this? Junhyuk said. His voice was very quiet. Min-seok looked at him, and for the first time the trained calm shifted into something that might have been real. A weariness, old and specific. The weariness of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has arrived at the point where it doesn't matter who sees him carrying it. Because it's already done, he said. The prosecutor's office received a preliminary notification 2 hours ago. A case file is being formally opened. Your credentials are on 8 months of illegal weapons trafficking. He looked at Junhyuk. I've won, Junhyuk. I'm telling you because the only thing left to decide is how the next 12 hours go. Amara counted her heartbeats. It was a thing she did when her brain needed to anchor to something physical and specific, when the world was moving faster than she could process, and she needed a point of stillness. 1, 2, 3. The prosecutor's office had been notified. That meant the window for neutralizing the forged communications before they became the foundation of a formal case was narrow. Not closed, but narrow, and getting narrower in a way that she could almost feel in real time. She looked at Junhyuk. He was looking at Min-seok with the particular expression of a man who has gone past anger into something quieter and more structural. The face of someone reorganizing their understanding of the last 23 years around a new central fact. She could not afford to let him stay there. Junhyuk, she said. He didn't look at her. Junhyuk. Her voice was steady. I need you to focus. He looked at her. The expression shifted. Not gone, but redirected. The digital credentials, she said. The communications on that phone. Someone created them, which means someone had access to your secured line's authentication protocol. That's not something Min-seok could do alone. He doesn't have the technical background, and a forensically authentic forgery at that level requires resources. She looked at Min-seok. Who built them? Min-seok said nothing. You've told us everything else. You said it yourself. It's already done. So who built the communications? A pause. Then with the flat resignation of a man closing a chapter. A digital security firm in Busan. They specialize in authentication systems. They've done work for financial institutions. He paused. They're not difficult to find if you know what you're looking for. And their work is reversible, Amar said. Forensic analysis can identify fabrication if you know the specific methodology and you have access to the original authentication server logs. She looked at Junhyuk. Which your IT security team has. The server logs are the one thing Min-seok can't fake because they're stored on infrastructure he doesn't control. Junhyuk was looking at her with full attention now. The weariness was still in him. It would be there for a long time, she thought, the specific exhaustion of a betrayal, that old. But he was present. How long? He said. To pull the logs and run a comparative analysis against the forged communications. She did the calculation in her head. 4 hours, maybe 3 if your IT lead understands the priority. And the prosecutorial case. If we can demonstrate to an independent forensic examiner that the communications were fabricated, the case collapses before it can be formalized. But we need to move before Yoon Chang-min can shepherd the file past the initial review stage. She paused. That means we have, she checked the time, approximately 5 hours before the window closes. Min-seok had gone very still. He was watching her with an expression she recognized because she had seen versions of it before. In the holding cell, in the car, across the conference table from men who had suddenly looked at her and realized they had made a serious error in their assessment of what they were dealing with. You can't get to the prosecutor's office in 5 hours, he said. His voice had changed slightly. For the first time, it was not fully controlled. I'm not going to the prosecutor's office, Amara said. I'm going to the Independent Commission Against Corruption. She looked at him, which is a separate body with parallel jurisdiction on financial crime cases involving public officials. If we file a formal complaint against Deputy Prosecutor Yoon Chang-min for his connection to the freight company payroll, which I have documented in 3 of these exhibits, his authority to process the case file is suspended pending investigation. The case doesn't move forward until the complaint is resolved. The room was completely silent. Min-seok looked at Junhyuk. Something had shifted in his face. The last of the trained calm was doing something complicated, rearranging itself around a variable he had not included in his model. He stopped. Started again. You let a secretary plan your crisis management. No, Junhyuk said. I let the person who found the problem help solve it. They left Min Seok in the room with Baek Cheol and two others who had been outside the door, because leaving him anywhere else was not an option that currently existed. In the corridor, Junhyuk's phone was already at his ear, calling his IT director. Amara was beside him with the folder, walking fast, her cracked glasses slightly crooked, her cardigan still carrying the fold lines from the holding cell. They reached the elevator, the doors opened, they stepped in, and then the elevator stopped. Not between floors. At the floor below, the regular corporate floor of the financial consulting firm, which should have been empty at this hour. The doors opened. There were 4 men in the corridor. None of them were consultants. The one in front was broad, well-dressed, with the particular posture of someone who carried authority professionally, and Amara didn't know his face, but she knew the configuration, the way the other 3 positioned themselves in relation to him, the way the space in the corridor organized around his presence. He looked at Junhyuk with the expression of a man who had been waiting. Kang Junhyuk, he said, I'm Senior Agent Choi from the Financial Crimes Investigation Unit. We have a warrant. Junhyuk didn't move. The warrant covers the seizure of financial documents and digital communications related to an ongoing investigation into weapons trafficking. The agent's voice was professionally even. You'll need to come with us. Amara's hand tightened on the folder. 3 floors above them, Min Seok was in a room with Baek Cheol. He had told them it was already done. He had told them he had won and that the only question was how the next 12 hours went. He had been telling the truth. He'd made 1 phone call before Junhyuk took his phone. Maybe from a device they hadn't known about. Maybe through someone in that room before the others filed out. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that the timeline Amara had calculated, 5 hours, 3 if they moved fast, had just been removed. They didn't have 5 hours. They didn't have 1. Junhyuk looked at the agent. His face was composed in a way that cost him more than it showed. He looked at the warrant in the agent's hand, and he looked at the 3 men positioned in the corridor, and he did the calculation with the particular speed of a man who has survived by never miscounting the weight of a room. Then he looked at Amara. She was already looking at him. Her face was calm. Not composed in the trained way, but calm in the deeper way. The way of someone who has already arrived at a decision before the moment required it. She was holding the folder against her chest. Her glasses were still crooked. She said, very quietly, so that only he could hear it, "The backups aren't here." He held her gaze for 1 second. Understanding moved through him. "They're not in my apartment either," she said, "or my car, or anywhere they can reach with that warrant." 1 more second. "What do you need?" he said, equally quiet. 30 minutes, she said, "and 1 phone that isn't yours." He reached into his jacket, handed her the sealed phone from the safe house, the one Song Ki-tae had brought, still in its packaging. Then he straightened, turned to the agent. "I'll cooperate with the warrant," he said. His voice was completely level. "But I'm requesting that my attorney be present during any document seizure. Song Ki-tae. You can verify his credentials." He looked at the agent steadily. "It will take approximately 30 minutes for him to arrive." The agent looked at him. A professional assessment. Then, 30 minutes. We begin at 9:55. Junhyuk nodded. He did not look at Amara again. She was already walking, but not running, because running attracted attention, but moving with the quiet, deliberate pace of a woman who had been invisible in dangerous rooms for 2 years and had never once been stopped on her way out of one. She reached the stairwell door, pushed it open. Behind her, she heard Junhyuk's voice, calm and cooperative, beginning to engage the agent in conversation about document scope. 30 minutes. 3 backup locations, none of them accessible to a warrant. A phone she'd never used. And somewhere in this city, a digital security firm in Busan whose methodology she needed to reverse engineer fast enough to save a man who had walked into a police station at 4 in the morning in the rain because she called. She started down the stairs. The stairwell smelled like concrete and recycled air, and the particular cold that collects in spaces nobody uses except for emergencies. Amara went down 2 floors, then stopped. Not because she heard something, because she needed 10 seconds to think, and moving while thinking at this speed produced errors, and she could not afford errors right now. She stood on the landing and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way she'd taught herself to do when the anxiety got loud enough to interfere with function. Her hands were steady. She checked them deliberately, held them in front of her face and looked at them, and they were steady, which meant her body understood something her mind was still processing, which was that she had been preparing for exactly this kind of pressure for 2 years without knowing it. 3 backup locations. The first was a cloud account registered to an email address that didn't connect to her real name, created on a public terminal at a library in Mapugu 11 days ago. Everything she'd found in the first 7 days of investigation was there. The initial ledger discrepancies, the freight manifest comparisons, the first shell company registration traces. The second was a physical drive in a safety deposit box at a private banking institution in Gangnam, under a secondary ID she'd established 4 years ago when she first moved to Seoul, because her mother had told her, very specifically, that a woman living alone in a foreign country needed a financial layer that wasn't connected to her primary identity. Her mother had meant it for emergencies. This qualified. The third was the most important one, and it was the one that would take the most time to reach. And the time was now 28 minutes and shrinking. She peeled the packaging off the phone, powered it on, found the signal. She called Song Ki-tai. He answered on the first ring, which meant he was already awake and already moving, which was what she needed. "It's Amara," she said. "Don't use Jun Hyuk's name. They're with him now." A pause, very brief. "I'm listening." "I need you to file an emergency complaint with the ICAC against Deputy Prosecutor Yoon Chong-min. Conflict of interest and undisclosed financial relationship with a party under investigation. I'm sending you the documentation in the next 4 minutes. It goes to the same secure upload channel you used for the warrant review this morning." She was already moving down the stairs again, the phone pressed to her ear. "The complaint needs to be filed before 9:55, which is when the seizure begins. If Chongmin's authority is suspended, the case file cannot advance. I'll need the full documentation to file. You'll have it in 4 minutes. Some of it is in the cloud account I'm accessing now. The rest..." She pushed through the ground floor stairwell door into a service corridor. "The rest is at a third location. I need 40 additional minutes to get there and back. I can file a preliminary complaint with partial documentation. It will hold for review." "How long does review take?" "Minimum 6 hours, maximum 48. "That's enough." She found the service exit, pushed it open into a side street that smelled like early morning and drainage water and, somewhere, food. "File the preliminary the moment you receive what I'm sending. I'll have the full documentation to you before the review window closes." "Understood." A pause. "Amara, are you alone out there?" "Yes." Another pause, shorter. "Be careful." She ended the call. The cloud account took 3 minutes on the phone's browser, which was 2 minutes longer than she wanted because the connection speed on the secure channel was throttled, and she was uploading 11 files totaling 43 megabytes, and every second of the loading bar felt like it had physical weight. She stood in the side street with her back against the building wall, watching the upload progress on the screen, watching the street, watching both at once. The files completed at 3 minutes and 40 seconds. She forwarded the upload confirmation to Song Ki-tai's secure address. Then she found the nearest intersection, oriented herself against the street grid she'd memorized when she first moved to this district, because she was the kind of person who memorized street grids and started walking. The Gangnam Banking Institution opened at 9:30. It was currently 9:19. She had 24 minutes to cover what her phone's mapping function told her was a 17-minute walk. She walked fast. Seoul in the morning moved around her the way it always did, with the dense purposefulness of a city that did not particularly notice individuals, which was normally a neutral fact and was now a useful one. She was a woman in a gray cardigan with a folder under her arm and glasses with a cracked left lens, moving quickly through a business district. Nobody looked at her. Nobody had ever looked at her. She slipped through the morning crowd like water through fingers, and for the first time in her life, she felt the power of that, rather than the diminishment. Her phone buzzed. Song Ki-tai. Preliminary complaint filed. 9:21 a.m. Confirmation number attached. She exhaled once. then kept walking. The safety deposit room at the private banking institution was small and lit with the kind of fluorescent light that makes everything look slightly more clinical than it is. The box was in her hands by 9:34. She had the drive in her jacket pocket by 9:36. She was back on the street by 9:38. The drive contained the core of it, the server log comparisons she had begun pulling before the arrest, which she had copied onto the drive, not because she knew what they would prove, but because her brain had identified them as load-bearing, and her brain was usually right about that. The server logs were the thing Min-suk couldn't fake. He'd said so himself, without knowing he was saying it. He'd built the forged communications on authentication credentials, but authentication credentials were not the same as server infrastructure. Every genuine communication on Jun Hyuk's secured line generated a log entry on a server that Min-suk's Busan firm had never touched, because touching it would have required physical access to hardware that was air-gapped and location secured. If the forged communications showed activity on Jun Hyuk's credentials, but the server logs showed no corresponding entries at the same timestamps, the forgery was provable, not arguable. Provable. The kind of provable that held up to independent forensic examination. She needed the server logs from Jun Hyuk's IT director. She needed them in the next 63 minutes. She called the number Jun Hyuk had given her the previous night for non-emergency contact with his technical team. It was an internal number listed for administrative staff. The IT director's name was Shin Dong-hyun. She had met him twice in 2 years. Once when she'd helped route a misdirected hardware delivery. Once when she'd attended a building security briefing that he'd presented. He was 34, quiet, wore the same brand of wireframe glasses in 4 different colors, and had the focused distraction of someone whose primary relationship was with systems rather than people. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "This is Amara Bennett," she said, "Jun Hyuk's personal secretary. We spoke during the Uedo security briefing 14 months ago." A beat. "I remember you." He sounded careful. The morning's situation had presumably begun reaching the technical team by now. News moved fast in closed systems, usually faster than it should. "I need the server log files from the executive secured communication channel," she said. "Specifically the timestamp authenticated access logs for the past 8 months. I need them pulled, verified, and transmitted to an external forensic review address in the next 55 minutes. Silence. "Mr. Shin," she said, "I understand this is outside normal request procedure. I understand that what I'm asking requires you to make a judgment call about who has the authority to make this request given that Jun Hyuk is currently not available to authorize it directly." She kept her voice even, not pleading, factual. "The logs will exonerate him. The forged communications on the warrant evidence do not have corresponding server log entries, which means the logs prove the forgery. If we do not get them to a forensic reviewer before the case file is formalized, that window closes." Another silence. Longer this time. "You're certain about the log entries," Shin said. "Not a challenge, a technical question. The forgery was built on credential duplication, not server access. Whoever built it had the authentication keys, but not the infrastructure access. The logs will be clean." She heard him moving. The sound of a keyboard, fast, methodical. 55 minutes, he said. "Yes." "Send me the forensic review address." She sent it. Then she moved, because standing still was no longer something her body would agree to. Warm. The office building she needed was 12 minutes away. She covered it in 9. The external forensic review firm was a digital security consultancy on the 14th floor of a glass building that caught the morning light in a way that would have been pleasant under other circumstances. The firm was called Hana Digital Forensics, and she had found them in 40 minutes of research 11 days ago when she was still in the stage of preparation where she was cataloging resources she might need if things went wrong. Things had gone wrong. She had the right address. The lead examiner's name was Dr. Park Soo-jin, and she was in her office when Amara arrived, and she was the kind of woman who processed information without visible reaction, which Amara found immediately and deeply reassuring. "I called ahead," Amara said. 20 minutes ago. An urgent forensic authentication case." "I know," Dr. Park said. "Sit down." Amara sat. She put the folder and the drive on the desk. She looked at the drive for a moment. I need a comparative analysis between forged digital communications and server log entries from the same time period, she said. The communications are on a warrant held by the Financial Crimes Investigation Unit. The server logs are being transmitted to you now from an internal IT source, ETA, approximately 47 minutes. She looked at Dr. Park. I need a written preliminary finding within 90 minutes of receiving the logs, even a partial finding, something that states, on the record, that the authentication methodology is inconsistent with the server log data. Dr. Park looked at her steadily. You understand that a preliminary finding has limited evidentiary weight without full analysis. I understand. I need it to stop a case file from being formalized. I don't need conviction-level certainty right now. I need enough to create reasonable procedural doubt. Dr. Park looked at the drive, then at Amara. You prepared for this. I prepared for the possibility that I might need it, Amara said. There's a difference. Dr. Park almost smiled. Almost. Leave the drive in the folder. I'll contact you when the logs arrive. She was back on the street at 10:11. Song Ki-tae called her at 10:14. The ICAC acknowledged the preliminary complaint, he said. Changmin's case file authority is suspended pending conflict of interest review. The seizure at the Yeouido building is currently on hold while the FCIC legal team assesses the jurisdictional impact. Amara stopped walking. People moved around her on the sidewalk, irrelevant and continuous. How long is the hold? Minimum 4 hours. They're contacting the ICAC for clarification on scope. 4 hours. She had 4 hours. Jun Hyuk, she said. He's with them. Cooperative, as agreed. Baek Cheol has been in contact. He's stable. Song Ki-tae paused. Amara, this is remarkable work. I need you to know. Tell me later, she said. Where is Min Seok right now? A longer pause. That's actually a concern. Baek Cheol reports that Min Seok was being held on the Yeouido floor. When the seizure went on hold and the legal team's attention shifted to the jurisdictional question, there was a period of approximately 12 minutes where the internal security configuration was disrupted. Amara understood immediately. He's gone, she said. He left the building 20 minutes ago. We don't have a current location. She stood on the sidewalk in the morning light with the city moving around her and processed what that meant. Min Seok had said it was already done. But it wasn't done. She was still moving, and the case file was stalled and the forgery was being examined. He would know that by now. He would know that his timeline was compromised, which meant he was not running. A man like Min Seok did not run. Running was for people who had already lost, which meant he was repositioning. Toward what? She ran the variables. The witnesses, the documentation, the people who had seen and heard things in that room this morning, the people who could corroborate. Byung-jae. Byung-jae had held the phone, had read the messages, had sat in that room and heard Min Seok describe the operation in his own words. He was the only member of the inner circle who had been present for the full disclosure. She called Song Ki-tae back. Find Choi Byung-jae right now. Don't let him be alone. Chet. Getting to Byung-jae required a car, and the car required Baek Cheol, and Baek Cheol was in a building with FCIC agents, but Baek Cheol was also the kind of man who anticipated requirements before they were stated. So when Amara called the number Jun Hyuk had given her, Baek Cheol answered on the first ring and said, I'm already in the car. Where? She told him. He arrived in 6 minutes, which was fast enough that she wondered briefly how he'd done it, and then decided not to spend any of her current cognitive load on that particular question. She got in. He was already moving before the door closed. Byung-jae is at his secondary office in Mapo, Baek Cheol said. I've been in contact. He's aware of the situation. Is he safe? For now. He had 2 of his own people with him. Min Seok? No confirmed sighting. He has resources outside the organization. The Busan connection, at minimum. Possibly others we don't know about. Amara held the folder in her lap and looked out the windshield at the city. 14 months. Min Seok had spent 14 months building this, and it was detailed and thorough and almost flawless. And it had come apart because of a 400,000 won discrepancy in a freight ledger that she had found on a Tuesday afternoon because her brain would not let a wrong number rest. She thought about that, about the thin thread of it, the way enormous things hung on small ones. The car moved through traffic and the morning was fully established now, the city loud and functional and indifferent. And she thought about Jun Hyuk in that room with the agents, cooperative and composed, and buying her time with his presence. And she thought about what that cost him, and she pushed the thought down because she needed the next 40 minutes to be about the work, and not about him. Byung-jae's secondary office was above a dry cleaning business in Mapogu, up a narrow staircase that smelled like chemical solvent and old wood. He was at a desk with two men stationed by the door and a phone in his hand when she arrived, and he looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the meeting, with the recalibrated assessment of a man who had updated his model. "You stopped it," he said. "I slowed it," she said. "It's not stopped." She sat. No offer of coffee, no preamble. She laid the situation out for him in 4 minutes flat. The ICAC complaint, the forensic examination, the server logs, the 4-hour window, Min Seok's disappearance. Byung-jae listened without interrupting. "What do you need from me?" he said. "A signed statement," she said. "Your account of what Min Seok said in that room this morning. His exact words about the operation, the timeline, the prosecutor's office connection. Signed, witnessed, time-stamped. That statement puts me in direct conflict with Min Seok." "Yes." "Permanently." "Yes," she said. "I'm not going to tell you it doesn't. I'm going to tell you that the evidence is going to be enough to take him down regardless. The forensic finding, the ICAC complaint, the server logs. But right now the case is in a procedural hold and Jun Hyuk is in a room with federal agents, and the only thing that changes the weight of this morning before that hold expires is a first-hand account from someone who was in that room." Byung-jae looked at her for a long moment. "He threatened you," she said. "Not a guess." "In the meeting, before we arrived, he told them that anyone who sided with Jun Hyuk was making a choice they'd have to live with." Something moved in Byung-jae's face. Confirmation without words. "You've been living with it for the last 3 hours," she said, "and you're still here." Another long moment, then Byung-jae reached across the desk and picked up a pen. "Get me paper," he said. The statement took 22 minutes to write, which was 18 minutes longer than she would have liked, but Byung-jae wrote with the careful thoroughness of a man who understood that what he was committing to paper had to be unassailable, and she did not rush him. His phone rang at 10:53. He looked at the screen. His face changed, a very small change, the kind that meant the name on the screen was not expected. "Min Seok," he said, showing her the screen. She looked at it. "Answer it," she said. He looked at her, a question in it. "Put it on speaker," she said, "and answer it." He set the phone on the desk and accepted the call. For 2 seconds there was just breathing. Then Min Seok's voice came through the speaker, and it was different from the voice in the meeting room, stripped of the trained calm, carrying something that sounded like the edges of a man who was still functional, but aware that his margins were contracting. "Byung-jae," he said, "where are you?" "Office," Byung-jae said. Neutral. "I need to talk to you, alone." "You can talk now." A pause. "There are things you need to understand about this morning. The full picture. I don't think you saw the full picture." "I saw the documents," Byung-jae said. "I saw the phone. I heard what you said to Jun Hyuk." Silence. "Then you know I had reasons," Min Seok said. "You've known me for 17 years. You know I don't act without reasons. You built a case to send him to prison. I built a contingency." His voice tightened slightly. "There's a difference. I built something that would only activate if he moved against us, against what we built. He was going to dismantle the inner circle. He restructured a proposal 2 years ago," Byung-jae said. "He never implemented it." A longer silence. "Where's the secretary?" Min Seok said. The tone had shifted, colder, more direct. Byung-jae looked at Amara. She shook her head, one small movement. I don't know, Byung-jae said. She's the problem, Min-seok said. The complaint she filed, the forensic review, it can all be addressed if the primary witness recants, if the evidence chain is interrupted. His voice was very level now, which was more disturbing than the tightness had been. I need to speak with her directly. She's not here. Byung-jae. A pause with weight. I know she's there. I know she went to the banking institution this morning at 9:34. I know she met with Hana Digital Forensics at 10:04. I know she arrived at your building 12 minutes ago. Another pause. I have been watching her movements since she left the Yoido building. The room went very cold. Amara looked at Baek Cheol, who was by the door. He was already on his own phone, texting, face hard. She has nothing to say to you, Byung-jae said. She should reconsider that, Min-seok said, because the digital forensics examination requires the server logs to complete. The server logs are transmitted through Shin Dong-hyun. I have 2 men with Shin Dong-hyun right now in the IT facility. The transmission hasn't left yet. His voice, through the phone speaker in the small room above the dry cleaning shop, was almost gentle. Tell her she has 20 minutes to agree to withdraw the forensic request, or the logs don't reach Dr. Park, and the case file advances on the timeline I built. The call ended. The room was completely silent. Amara's hands were flat on the desk in front of her. She looked at them. Steady. She registered distantly that they were still steady, and the distance of that observation felt like it was coming from very far away. 20 minutes. Shin Dong-hyun was in a facility with 2 of Min-seok's men. The logs were the proof. Without the logs, the forensic finding was incomplete. Without the complete forensic finding, the ICAC complaint held the case for 6 hours maximum before it had to be released. She had built everything on the server logs being clean. She had built it precisely and carefully over 11 days and 3 hours of this morning, and Min-seok had found the one weight-bearing piece that she could not reach from where she was. She looked at Byung-jae. He was looking back at her with the expression of a man who understood the architecture of the problem and did not yet have a solution. She looked at Baek Cheol. The IT facility, she said. Where is it? Mapogu, Baek Cheol said. Near the river, 12 minutes from here. Can you get there in 8? He looked at her steadily. Yes. Min-seok's men are there. 2, he said. I know. If they're there to stop the transmission, they're there to do it quietly. They're not there to create a scene that brings attention to themselves or to the facility. Correct. Which means if you go in with enough presence to make a scene the priority risk, they'll withdraw rather than escalate. Baek Cheol was already moving toward the door. 8 minutes, she said. Less, he said. And he was gone. She picked up the new phone, called Dr. Park at Hana Digital Forensics. The log transmission may be delayed, she said, the moment Dr. Park answered. I need you to begin the preliminary analysis on what you have right now, whatever I gave you on the drive. Start writing the partial finding. A partial finding without the logs? I know what it won't prove, Amara said. Write what it does prove. Every single thing it proves, in as much technical detail as you can produce in the next 15 minutes. Because in 15 minutes, I'm going to need something to put in front of someone who needs to make a decision, and I need it to be on paper, and I need it to be yours. A pause. Then the sound of a keyboard. I'll have something in 12, Dr. Park said. Amara ended the call. Byung-jae had been watching her. He held up the statement he'd been writing. 4 pages, handwritten, signed at the bottom. This still matters, he said. Yes, she said. It does. She took it, added it to the folder, stood up. Byung-jae looked at her. What are you going to do? She thought about that for exactly the amount of time she could afford to think about it. Min-seok had said 20 minutes. He had said it because 20 minutes was enough time for her to panic, to calculate, to find the edges of what was possible and discover they didn't reach. He had said it because he had watched her work all morning and he had a model of her now, and his model said she would try to solve this through the channels she'd been using, the lawyers, the forensic examiners, the documents, the careful, methodical chain of evidence. His model was right about all of that. What it missed was that she had been invisible for 2 years in rooms where decisions were made by men who did not include her in the calculation. She had learned in those 2 years exactly how much you could do when nobody was watching. "I'm going to end this," she said. She picked up the folder and walked toward the door. And she did not look back, because looking back was for people who weren't sure. She was sure. The staircase was narrow, and it smelled like chemical solvent, and below her the city was loud and the morning was already hours old, and somewhere in the IT facility near the river Bekchiol was making 8 minutes feel like 5. And somewhere in a room with federal agents, Kang Jun-hyuk was holding a line she had asked him to hold. And she had 12 minutes before Dr. Park had a partial finding in writing, and Min Seok was waiting for her to run out of moves. She pushed through the door at the bottom of the stairs into the morning light. She had one move left, and it required her to walk directly into the one place Min Seok would never expect her to go, alone, with nothing but a folder of documents and 23 years of his own words. The one place Min Seok would never expect her to go was the FCIC field office in Yeouido. Not to surrender, not to cooperate with the seizure, to walk through the front entrance of a federal investigation unit with a folder of documents and ask, by name, for the supervising agent on the Financial Crimes Division. Because the one thing Min Seok's model of her did not include was the possibility that she would go directly to the people he had weaponized and give them something more valuable than what he had already given them. She had 17 minutes. The field office was 4 blocks from Byung-jae's building, which was either luck or the kind of proximity that the universe occasionally arranges without asking permission. She walked fast. Her cardigan was still creased from the holding cell. Her glasses were still cracked. She had stopped noticing either of these things, which meant something about where her attention had gone. She pushed through the front entrance at 11:03. The desk officer looked up. He was young, mid-20s, the particular blankness of someone doing intake duty who had not yet encountered anything that required him to recalibrate. "I need to speak with the supervising agent on the Kang financial investigation," she said. "My name is Amara Bennett. I'm the individual whose arrest triggered the case file. I have evidence of prosecutorial misconduct and forged authentication data, and I have 14 minutes before the window for using it effectively closes." The desk officer's blankness shifted into something more awake. "Please sit. I need the supervising agent," she said. "Not a duty officer, not a junior agent, the supervisor. Now, please." Something in her voice, not loudness, not aggression, but the specific density of someone who has spent the last 8 hours doing things that could not be undone and has arrived here as the final calculated move of a morning that started at 3 a.m. in a thunderstorm, communicated itself to the desk officer with enough clarity that he picked up his phone. The supervising agent's name was Jung-hae Won. She was 53, compact, with close-cropped silver hair and the eyes of someone who had spent 3 decades deciding what was real. She came through the interior door in 90 seconds, looked at Amara with a single comprehensive sweep, and said, "Conference room, now." Jung-hae Won sat across the table from Amara and did not touch the folder for the first 4 minutes. She just listened. Amara talked. She had given versions of this account 3 times already, in the car, at the safe house, to Byung-jae, and each iteration had been faster and more precise, the way a path through unfamiliar terrain becomes clearer each time you walk it. This version was the clearest. It was also the most dangerous because she was giving it to a federal agent, and everything she said could be used in directions she couldn't fully control. She said it anyway. She laid out the freight operation, the shell companies, the authorization signatures, the forged communications and why they were forgeries, and what the server logs would prove when they arrived at Dr. Park's office. She laid out Deputy Prosecutor Yoon Chong-min's connection to the freight company payroll, and the ICAC complaint Song Ki-tae had filed at 9:21. She laid out Min Seok's location of Shin Dong-hyun and the 2 men in the IT facility and the 20-minute ultimatum. Then she put Byung-jae's signed statement on the table. Jung-hae Won looked at it. She read it. She read it twice. The second reading was slower. Then she looked at Amara. "You're giving me the actual operation," she said. "The weapons trafficking, the shell companies, all of it." "I'm giving you the person who built it," Amara said. And the evidence that the case file your unit is currently processing was constructed to frame an innocent man for a crime committed by the person who built it. Young-hae-won was quiet for a moment. Innocent is a complicated word in this context. I'm aware, Amara said. I'm not here to tell you Kang Jun-hyuk is a citizen of the year. I'm here to tell you that the specific crimes in your current case file are not his, and the person who committed them used your unit as a weapon to destroy a man he wanted removed from power. Whether you pursue other matters through other means is your business. She met Young-hae-won's eyes steadily. But using a federal investigation as an instrument of private criminal warfare is something that should concern you professionally, regardless of who the target is. Another silence. Jung-hae-won's eyes were very still, reading her. The IT facility, the agent said. Baek Cheol, Jun-hyuk's head of security, went there 8 minutes ago. If Min-sok's men are still present, your agents going in now changes the calculation significantly. Young-hae-won stood. She opened the conference room door and spoke to someone outside in a low, rapid voice. Then she came back, sat. The seizure on the Yoido floor, she said. That's on hold pending jurisdictional review. I know. The ICAC complaint suspended Chang Min's authority. Chang Min. The name came out of her flatly, with a flatness that told Amara something about the history of that name in this office. Yoon Chang Min has been a person of interest in this division for 14 months, she paused. We had no direct evidence. You do now, Amara said. Exhibit 9 in that folder. His name on the freight company payroll as a legal compliance advisor. 16 months of payments. The documentation was filed with the ICAC this morning. Young-hae-won looked at the folder. Something shifted in her expression. Controlled, but present. The particular expression of a person who has been looking for a door and has just been handed the key to it by someone they didn't expect. Where's Park Min-seok right now? She said. I don't know his current position, Amara said, but I know he's been tracking my movements since I left the Yoido building this morning, which means he knows I came here. Young-hae-won looked at her steadily. You used yourself as bait. I used myself as a variable he didn't account for, Amara said. It's different. Baek Cheol called at 11:19. Amara was still in the conference room. Young-hae-won was outside making calls that Amara could hear in fragments through the closed door. Rapid, authoritative, the sound of a machine being redirected. She answered. 2 men, Baek Cheol said. His voice was level but slightly rough at the edges. The texture of someone who had been physical recently. They're contained. The log transmission was delayed but not stopped. Shin Dong-hyun is unharmed. The transmission is going out now. She exhaled. How long? Already sent. Dr. Park should have it by 11:25. She looked at the time on the phone. 11:19, 6 minutes. Baek Cheol, she said. Yes. Min-seok knows I'm at the FCIC office. A pause. I know. I've been tracking his phone's location through the network. Jun-hyuk's technical team has the access. He's been stationary for the last 11 minutes. A building in Mapogu. Private parking structure. She processed that. Min-seok had been stationary for 11 minutes, which meant he had stopped moving when she walked into the FCIC field office. Because walking into the FCIC field office was not a move his model included, and a man who has spent 14 months building a precise structure responds to an unexpected variable by stopping and recalculating. He's going to run, she said. Not yet, Baek Cheol said. If he runs before he knows what she's given them, he loses the ability to manage the narrative. He'll wait until he understands the shape of what's happening. How long does he wait? 20 minutes? 30? He's patient. Then we have 20 minutes. For what? For Young-hae-won to verify the forensic finding and move on his location, she said. Keep the tracking active. Send the coordinates to this number. She gave him the number and ended the call. Dr. Park called at 11:28. I have the logs, she said. The comparison is complete. The forged communications show authentication activity at 17 timestamps over 8 months. The server log shows 0 corresponding entries at any of those timestamps. Her voice was professionally flat, carrying the news the way a good forensic examiner carried all news, without the weight of the meaning, because the meaning was someone else's to carry. The conclusion is definitive. The communications were fabricated. The authentication credentials were duplicated without server access. This is not arguable. Amara stood up. I need that finding transmitted to Agent Jung-hae Won at the FCIC field office in Yeouido, she said. In writing, signed in the next 4 minutes. It's already transmitting, Dr. Park said. Such a mom. What happened in the next 40 minutes moved the way the best planned things move when the plan finally meets the reality it was built for. Not smoothly, because nothing real moves smoothly, but with the specific momentum of a structure that was built correctly and is now bearing the weight it was designed to bear. Jung-hae Won received the forensic finding at 11:31. She read it in 2 minutes and 12 seconds. Then she made 3 phone calls, the last of which was to the ICAC to confirm the status of the complaint against Chang Min, and the confirmation came back that the complaint was active and Chang Min's authority was suspended pending full review. The case file built on Min Seok's forged communications could not be advanced by Chang Min. It could not be advanced by anyone else in the prosecutor's office without triggering a separate review process that would surface the forensic finding. The structure Min Seok had spent 14 months building had one weight-bearing wall, and Amara had identified it 11 days ago in a freight ledger, and she had spent 11 days and 1 8-hour morning removing it piece by piece, and now it was gone. Jun Hyuk was released from the Yeouido building at 11:47. He walked out into the morning. It was fully midday now, the sky the pale washed gray of Seoul after rain, everything too bright and too ordinary. And Baek Cheol was there, and Song Ki-tae was there, and Amara was there, standing slightly to his left and 1 step back, which was the position she'd occupied for 2 years, except that she was not invisible, and she was not apologizing for her presence, and her glasses were still cracked. He looked at her. He looked at her for a long moment in the way he had never looked at her across conference tables and office thresholds, directly, with nothing managed between his face and hers. The logs, he said. Clean, she said. Every timestamp. The forensic finding is in writing. He was quiet for a moment. Min Seok, he said. FCIC has his location. They moved on it 8 minutes ago. She looked at him. He didn't resist. Baek Cheol said he walked out of the parking structure when the agents arrived. She paused. He looked tired. Jun Hyuk looked out at the street. Something moved through his face, complicated and old and not something she was going to try to name. 23 years, he said. Not to her exactly, just to the air. She didn't say anything. Sometimes the right response to something was silence, and she had learned that in 2 years of being the person in rooms who nobody talked to and who therefore listened to everything. After a moment, he said, You went into the FCIC office. Yes. Alone. Yes. With a folder. And Byung-jae's statement. He looked at her again. The look had the same quality as before, direct, nothing managed. But there was something additional in it now, something that had been accumulating since 3 a.m. and had not yet found its form. You could have been arrested, he said. Walking into a federal office during an active case against me. They could have held you. They could have... I know, she said. It was the only move left. It was a significant risk. So I was calling you at 3 in the morning, she said. I've been making significant risks since Tuesday, 11 days ago. I'm getting accustomed to them. Something happened in his face. Not quite a smile. The morning had not arrived at smiles yet, might not for some time, but the precursor to one. The softening that comes before. Come on, he said. And he walked toward the car, and she walked beside him, not behind, beside, and neither of them remarked on it because it didn't require remarking. Park Min Seok was formally charged at 2:15 p.m. The charges were extensive: weapons trafficking, financial fraud, corporate espionage, evidence fabrication, and the procurement of a public official, Deputy Prosecutor Yoon Chang-min, who was simultaneously taken in for questioning by the ICAC with the understanding that his cooperation would be the primary factor in determining the outcome of his own case. Chang Min cooperated. By 4 p.m., he had provided a full account of his arrangement with Min Seok, the timeline of the case construction, the specific methodology used to build the authentication forgeries. He named the Busan digital security firm. He named 2 additional contacts in the freight logistics network. The charges expanded accordingly. Sergeant Park Hyun-soo, the officer who had called Jun Hyuk's encrypted number at 3 a.m. with the specific intention of confirming his response, was suspended pending internal affairs review. The weapons, the actual physical shipments that had moved through the northern freight routes over 8 months, were traced by a joint FCIC and customs enforcement operation to 3 warehouses in Incheon and 1 in Gyeonggi Province. The receiving party, whose name Byung-jae had not said aloud in the meeting room, was identified through the manifest documentation and became the subject of a separate investigation that Amara would learn about only in fragments. Later, through the particular information osmosis of being present in rooms where powerful people spoke freely around her. Min Seok was held without bail on the grounds that his resources and connections made him a flight risk. He did not contest it. He sat in the processing room when the agents finished, with the weariness of a man who had arrived at the conclusion of something that had cost him everything and was too old for the kind of rage that might have served him better earlier. Jun Hyuk did not go to the processing facility. He did not send anyone. He stayed in the safe house, and he made calls, and he managed the internal fallout of a morning that had fractured his organization in ways that would require months to fully assess. And Amara sat at the table with her laptop and helped him do it, because that was what the situation required, and she was very good at doing what the situation required. At 6 p.m., the inner circle had a second meeting. This one was different. The men who had been uncertain that morning were less uncertain now. Byung-jae presented his signed statement in summary. The full account of what Min Seok had admitted in that room, the 14 months, the forged communications, the plan to use the FCIC as a demolition tool. The statement was supplemented by the forensic finding, which Amara had organized into a readable summary and printed and placed in front of each man with the same quiet efficiency she'd used to place agendas for 2 years. Nobody laughed. Nobody looked at her like furniture. Some of them looked at her with the specific discomfort of people who are processing the distance between how they have previously behaved and how they ought to behave, which was not the same as respect, but was the necessary precondition for it. Kwon Dae-ho, the silver-haired man who had asked the first good question that morning, looked at her for a long moment after the meeting. Then he said, "The freight ledger. You found it in a routine filing." "Yes," she said. "How long did you sit on it before you were certain?" 7 days, she said. "I kept telling myself it was a rounding error." He looked at her with an expression that was, she thought, as close to sheepish as a man like Kwon Dae-ho had ever come. "We should have—" He stopped, started again. "You should have had a better channel to bring this through." "I had the channel I had," she said. "It worked." He nodded. "Once." Then he walked away, and she thought that was the most honest exchange she'd had with a member of the inner circle in 2 years, and that it had taken all of this to produce it, and she held that fact and looked at it for a moment, and then set it down. Thus, the safe house was quiet by 9 p.m. Baek Cheol was outside. Song Ki-tae had gone home to sleep. The IT director, Shin Dong-hyun, had sent a message at 7 confirming that the transmission was fully archived and his team was unharmed. The 2 men who had been with him had been identified and removed from the organization by Jeon Hyuk and a sequence of phone calls that Amara had listened to from across the table and had understood were being conducted with a particular deliberateness. The deliberateness of a man dismantling something he'd been too close to see clearly. She was at the table with her laptop. She had been writing a full incident report for the last 2 hours. Comprehensive, documented, formatted with the particular clarity that she brought to everything she organized, which was the kind of clarity that made complex things navigable. She would have organized this even if no one had asked for it. It was how she processed. The world became manageable when it was organized. Her spare glasses were on the table. She'd had Baek Cheol retrieve them from her apartment an hour ago. The oval frames that made her look like a librarian from a children's book. She was wearing them, and the cracked pair was in her jacket pocket because she wasn't ready to throw that pair away yet, and she wasn't going to examine why. Jun Hyuk came to the table and sat across from her. He had been on calls for the last hour. He set his phone down with the particular finality of a man who has finished something that needed finishing. He looked like a person who had been awake for 20 hours, which was because he had been awake for 20 hours. His jacket was gone. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up, which she had seen perhaps 3 times in 2 years. He looked at the incident report on her laptop screen. "You're writing it up," he said. "Someone has to." "You don't have to do this tonight." "I know," she said. "I want to. It helps me." She saved the document, closed the laptop, looked at him. He looked back. They sat in the silence for a moment, and it was a different kind of silence than the ones they'd occupied together throughout this long, strange day. Not charged, not urgent, not full of things that couldn't wait. Just the silence of 2 people who had been through something together and were now on the other side of it. "Your family in Atlanta," he said. "Do they know what happened?" "No," she said. "I'll call my mother tomorrow. She'll want details. She'll also want to know why I didn't call her at 3 in the morning, and I'll tell her I didn't want to worry her, and she'll say that's the exact reason she worries about me living so far away." She paused. "It'll be a long call." Something moved through his face, genuine this time. A small, tired, real thing. "How are you?" he said. She thought about the question. She gave it the consideration it deserved rather than the automatic reassurance she would have given it a year ago. "I'm fine," she said. "And I also feel like I've been running at full capacity for 18 hours on 2 hours of sleep, and the adrenaline is wearing off, and I'm going to be genuinely exhausted tomorrow in a way I won't be able to ignore." She looked at him. "How are you?" He was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about what Min Seok said, about the restructuring proposal 2 years ago." He looked at his hands on the table. "He wasn't wrong that I was considering it. He was wrong about what it meant, but he wasn't wrong that I was thinking about changing things." A pause. "I've been thinking about why he couldn't ask me about it. Why 14 months of building a case against me seemed like a more manageable problem than a conversation." She watched his face. "That's a question about you and him," she said carefully, "but it's also a question about the kind of place this organization became, where the people closest to you couldn't tell you the truth." He looked up, met her eyes. "I know," he said. "I know it is." The honesty of it sat between them. Not comfortable because the truth of it wasn't comfortable, but present and real and not going anywhere. "You told me last night," he said, "that you couldn't go back to just being my secretary." "I did." "I said you probably couldn't." He held her gaze. "I want to tell you what I meant by that." She waited. "I meant that the way this organization has worked, the way I've led it, the things I've treated as normal, some of that has to change. And I can't change it well without someone who tells me the truth, who sees things I don't see and says so even when it's inconvenient." He paused. "You told me the truth at 3 in the morning when you could have protected yourself by saying nothing. You've been telling me the truth for 11 days without anyone asking you to." "That's a job description," she said, "not a personal statement." "I know the difference," he said, "and so do you." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back with the same directness he'd had since outside the Yoido building. Nothing managed, nothing between his face and hers. "Your world is dangerous," she said. "I've been in it for 2 years, and today was the first day any of it was directed at me personally. I understand that today wasn't an anomaly. I understand that proximity to you carries risks that don't apply to most people's lives." "Yes," he said, "it does. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter to me. I'm not glamorous about danger. I'm not built for it, and I don't want to be." She held his gaze. "But I'm also not going to pretend that today didn't teach me something about what I'm capable of, or that I regret how it went." "You shouldn't," he said. "You shouldn't regret any of it." "I know," she said. Another silence, this one slower. "What do you need?" he said. "Right now. Not tomorrow, not in 6 months. Now." She thought about her apartment, which she hadn't been in for 18 hours and which had plants that needed watering, and a half-finished incident report that was now finished on her laptop and a spare pair of glasses she'd been meaning to replace, and a shelf of books she'd been reading in the evenings when the organization's world went quiet enough to let her. She thought about all of it, and then she thought about the thing she actually needed right now, which was simple and honest and not very complicated. "I need to sleep," she said, "somewhere safe. And tomorrow I need my plants watered and a very long phone call with my mother and probably several cups of tea." He looked at her, something in his expression that was quiet and careful and the most human she had ever seen him. "The safe house has a room," he said, "and I think there's tea." "I know," she said. "I found it this morning." She closed the laptop fully, stood, picked up her glasses case, put it in her pocket. Then she stopped, looked at him. "Thank you," she said, "for coming tonight, for all of it." He shook his head slightly, not dismissing it, just refusing to let it be a debt. "You called," he said. "I came." She nodded, looked at the table, looked back at him. "I'd do it again," she said quietly. "Call you, even knowing how the night went." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. "So would I." 6 months later, the room was full. It was a private meeting space above a hotel in Gangnam, neutral territory, which was the only kind of territory that rival families agreed on when they came together. There were 7 families represented. Some of the men in the room had been in the organization for 20 years. Some were younger, inheritors of names and positions, still learning the weight of what they carried. Kang Jun-hyuk arrived 7 minutes late, which was deliberate. Men who arrive first spend those minutes calculating. Men who arrive last spend them being calculated. And the advantage in a room like this belonged to whoever was hardest to read on entry. He was not alone. Amara was beside him. She was wearing a dark blazer over a blouse the color of deep water, and her hair was out. Natural, full, the curls she'd spent 2 years pinning back because the office felt like a place that required her to take up less space. She was wearing the oval glasses, the ones she'd worried made her look like a librarian, and she had stopped worrying about it some weeks ago. She was carrying a leather portfolio that she had organized with her usual comprehensive precision, and she moved into the room the way she had learned to move through rooms in the past 6 months, without apology, without adjustment, exactly as much space as she required. 2 of the men laughed, quietly, not bothering to conceal it. The kind of laughter that was a statement. She had expected it. She set the portfolio on the table and opened it, and placed documents in front of each man with the same quiet efficiency she had always had. And she did not acknowledge the laughter, because acknowledging it would have been a gift to the people who produced it, and she was not in the business of giving gifts to people who had not earned them. Then she sat. One of the younger inheritors, a man named Han with sharp eyes and a suit that cost too much, looked at her and then at Jun-hyuk. "Who is she?" "She is the reason this meeting is happening on my terms instead of yours," Jun-hyuk said. "I'd suggest reviewing the documents she placed in front of you before asking further questions about who she is." Han looked at the documents. What happened over the next 40 minutes was something that several of the men in that room would discuss later, in the particular half-reluctant way that people discuss things that required them to update a deeply held assumption. Amara walked them through the financial architecture of each of their organizations, not threateningly, not as a power display, but as a demonstration of information, which was the most significant kind of power, because it couldn't be physically removed. She showed them the pressure points, the inefficiencies, the places where their structures were exposed. She showed them how the events of 6 months ago had rearranged the territory landscape and what that meant for the current equilibrium. She did it without raising her voice, without drama, without performing the confidence she had learned to simply have. The man who had laughed first, a gray-haired patriarch named Oh from Busan, had gone quiet by the 3rd document. By the 6th, he was leaning forward. By the time she finished, he was looking at her with the expression that Byung-jae had worn 6 months ago on the morning that changed everything, which was the expression of a man who has been wrong about something in a way that he can't entirely be angry about because he should have known better. "You ran this analysis," Oh said. Not a question. "Yes," Amar said. "How long?" 3 weeks. He was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular dignity of an old man who has decided something, I underestimated you. I know, she said. I won't again. I know that too, she said. Junhyuk said nothing. He had said very little throughout the meeting. He watched the room, and he watched Amara, and he let the work speak because the work was the language that mattered, and the work was hers. When the meeting ended and the families filed out, there was a different quality to the departures than to the arrivals. Less calculation, more thought. The particular quiet of people carrying information they hadn't expected to be carrying when they walked in. Oh stopped at the door, looked back at Jun Hyuk. Your secretary, he said. And there was something in the way he said it that had changed from the beginning of the meeting to its end. The same word, different weight. She'll be at the next meeting. She'll be at every meeting, Junhyuk said. Oh nodded once, and left. Outside, the evening was beginning. The city was shifting its register from the urgent pitch of working hours to the lower frequency of night, and the lights were coming on in the buildings across the street, and the air was cool, but not cold. Amara stood at the window of the now empty room and looked out. She was still carrying the portfolio. She always carried things. It was a habit she didn't think she would ever fully lose. Junhyuk came to stand beside her. Not close. There was appropriate space between them. The appropriate space of two people who had negotiated over 6 months, a proximity that was honest without being dishonest about what it was and what it was still becoming. Oh, we'll tell the others, she said. Yes. It will take a while for some of them to adjust. Some of them never will, he said. That's their problem. She looked at the city, at the lights coming on in sequence, building by building as the dark arrived. She thought about her apartment, which had plants that were thriving because she had been sleeping there most nights for 6 months, and had developed, for the first time, a genuine relationship with the habit of being home. She thought about her mother, who had come to visit for 2 weeks in the 4th month and had met Junhyuk once, briefly, and had afterwards said to Amara in a very specific tone of voice, "That man watches you the way people watch things they're afraid of losing," and Amara had said, "Mom," and her mother had said, "I'm not criticizing, I'm observing," and Amara had said, "I know," and her mother had said, "Good." She thought about 11 days of carrying something alone that she should not have had to carry alone, and about the fact that she would not carry things alone in the same way again, not because the world had become safer, but because she had become clearer about what she was worth, and clarity was its own kind of protection. She thought about the ledger. 400,001. A Tuesday afternoon. A cup of bad coffee. The thin thread that enormous things hang on. Jun Hyuk, she said. Yes. She turned from the window, looked at him directly, the way she had learned to look at things, fully, without apology for looking. The next 3 months are going to require significant restructuring, she said. The O family's exposure in the East creates a rebalancing opportunity that we should address before someone else identifies it. I want to run a full analysis of the Northern Freight network now that the shell companies have been dissolved. There are legitimate logistics gaps that need filling. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved. Is that all? He said. No, she said. I also want a better chair in my office. The one I have now is going to give me back problems. The thing that had been approaching his face for 6 months, the thing that the morning of the thunderstorm and the holding cell and the 11 days and all of it had been building toward, arrived. It was not a large thing. It was quiet and a little crooked and entirely real. He smiled. She looked at it, filed it away in the part of her that kept the things that mattered. Then she adjusted her glasses, tucked the portfolio under her arm, and walked toward the door. Come on, she said. We have work to do. He followed. And in the hallway, and in the elevator, and in the car moving through the lit city toward whatever the next thing was, there was no performance between them and no pretense and no version of either of them that was smaller than what they actually were. She was not invisible. She had never been invisible. She had only been surrounded by people who hadn't learned yet how to see. Now they knew. And the woman who had once hidden herself in oversized sweaters and apologies, and the careful posture of someone trying not to take up space, moved through the city she had chosen, beside the man who had come for her in the rain without hesitation, with her shoulders level and her chin up and her cracked glasses still in her pocket, because some things you keep not because they're beautiful, but because they're yours. The city moved around them, indifferent and continuous and full of its own urgent lives. And this one, this particular life, built from a wrong number in a freight ledger and a phone call at 3 in the morning and the accumulated courage of 11 days of being invisible and watching, went forward into the lit evening without apology and without looking back.